So thank you, Giovanni and Sam. I was really moved by the speeches that you both made. And so I'm already kind of full of emotion and enthusiasm. And we are delighted to have had the invitation to speak. Thank you, Charlotte, for recommending us. So that was great. And of course, the theme is exactly what Deanna and I have been busy with over the last 4 or 5 years as we've reached back into the history of the development of TA. So over to you.
Indeed, it is a privilege to be here and to be discussing such rich topics. A lot of the busyness that Steff mentioned earlier, I think, found its expression through live dialogue and conversation between us. And I like to think of that as a kind of fertile soil that helped our ideas grow roots. This is why we imagine the keynote today also as a form of dialogue, a back and forth between us that would hopefully stimulate our minds and hearts alike. I'm not very knowledgeable when it comes to plants, yet I know that whenever we put seeds into the soil, that soil is a key factor. And here I turn to you, Steff, like to a fellow gardener, to ask, what do you think were some of the seeds that later developed into TA as we know it today? What was the fertile soil that helped this approach grow robust roots?
Thank you. So, as I say, we're in dialogue, so I'll be looking at Deanna and hopefully looking around the room as well. So wave at us if you're feeling that we're not getting to you. Okay, so the soil in which TA developed, I think, as I was listening to Sam and Giovanni speak, I thought in some ways it's not much different, actually, sadly, because TA was developed really just after the Second World War, a time of conflict. And Eric Berne was an army psychiatrist. And that was a time where, in some ways, kind of 1949, there was a lot of positivity, like, okay, let's put all this fighting behind us, as if, and let's move forward. And that meant that there were a lot of people feeling like they wanted something new, and at the same time, there were a lot of troubled people. And places to go for the troubled people were really limited. So it seemed at that time there was psychoanalysis, which was expensive and costly in terms of time and money. And there was what's been referred to as the repressive inspirational, which I think is probably the school in which my mother was schooled, because her famous line was, "Now it doesn't do to dwell." So I've now made a career out of dwelling, which is very satisfying. So the repressive inspirational were like the Christian Scientists, who I think were kind of, come on, let's get on with life and move forward. And the psychoanalytic were, as I say, lengthy, costly. Eric Berne also had a deep social conscience, I think. He really wanted his patients to get well and to be involved in their own health and healing. So I think there's the beginning of the relational, really. It's like, you don't just come to me as the authority of what's going to make you well. Come on, let's get together and work it out. So I think if you can imagine that scene where people are really wanting to get well, and as Sam referred to earlier, it was kind of get well quicker and faster, and let's move on, which I think in one sense was inspirational, and in another sense, I think probably, well, in my opinion anyway, placed far too much emphasis on change and behavioural outcomes, and less emphasis on reflection. So how are you thinking about that, Deanna?
Well, I'm thinking that these ingredients all contributed to what we call today the framework of transactional analysis. And this framework rests on a very respectable theory and methodology. And here, somewhat naively and perhaps a bit shyly, I would like to ask you, do you think we can think about theory and methodology as the roots of an approach? Would there be some disadvantages, in your view, for looking at things from this perspective?
I love theory. I can keep myself very busy with it, and we were very busy in dialogue. I wrote a whole book about it. And of course, when I was a trainee, it was really important to have the theory come alive and be taught methods about how to apply the theory. But no, I don't really think of that as the soil. In fact, I think there's probably quite a danger in us thinking about that as the soil, because I think people can get too attached to a particular theory or methodology. I like to think of TA theory and methodology as a kind of scaffolding. So there's the structure and the scaffold, and within that scaffold, we can shape things and move things around and play and develop. There's the reach from the roots. And I think TA is wonderful for that. When you look at all of the ways in which people approach TA, it's just fantastic. And I get very excited about how people use it. One of my training groups recently, there was somebody using TA as a funeral director. And I thought, wow, that's quite incredible. There are so many places that it can be used. But as I say, I get worried about the idealization of the theory and that we can get too rigid in our thinking. A friend of mine in Manchester, when she first started training in TA, which feels like it was about 100 years ago, but she wrote this little pamphlet, which was called My First Dictionary of Not Okay Things to Say in TA. So it's like, don't say try, because that indicates that you've got a try-hard driver. And don't say this, because somebody's going to pathologize you for that. So I think it's really important that we don't get too rigid about our theory, and that we're open to it, and that we have a good foundation, which we do. How about you? What are your views about that?
Well, I'm thinking about how much TA has changed since the time of Eric Berne, and also what stayed the same. And I think from that time and the revolutionary ideas of his contemporaries, there has been huge potential for evolution. And the soil, or the social-political context, has changed a lot. And one thing that comes to mind, for instance, is the emergence of feminism and postmodern thinking, and how TA had to adapt and face that challenge. Those were times that came also with the opportunity of looking at things or with complexity and facing uncertainty. And I think that it can be pretty challenging, given how attached we are to our own certainties, and given the shame with which we respond to not knowing. I think TA has done a pretty good job at facing this challenge and finding ways to address complexity, and by taking into account the practitioner's subjectivity, or looking at the complexity that takes place in the transference-countertransference dynamics. More recent changes that I can think of today are our encounters with the technological world, and especially artificial intelligence. And with the risk of sounding perhaps a bit technology adverse, which I don't think I am, I notice how a lot of the time people can rest on these systems to the detriment of their own critical thinking, and to the detriment perhaps of an embodied relationship to their own selves. And I think in this context, conscious process is many times prioritized over unconscious affect and motivation, as perhaps another way of simplifying complexities, of taming uncertainty. And I think this runs the risk of dissociation becoming a sort of the new black of psychological thinking and functioning. In this context, I think TA needs to advocate for the existence of our unconscious internal lives, which at times may be generative as well as troubling. I think that such advocacy does not only involve articulating these ideas into the ethos of our practices, but it also means addressing them clinically with a robust framework. And I think that some of Berne's incipient ideas could still be good seeds to nurture. Regardless of all these changes, I think taking time to focus on the essence of our existence, on what fits, what doesn't, what we might want to learn or what we might be willing to learn, I think this offers the opportunity to experiment with what is being put before us. It's a playful yet serious endeavor, one that appeals to minds which are well rooted in reflective communities such as this one, and which can continue to grow and learn. I'm aware that this is also a very personal aspiration. And here I also would like to share some thoughts with you, Steff, to ask what do you think would be some of the aspirations for the future of TA?
Yes, I agree with you. I can't really emphasize enough the importance of critical thinking and reflection. And I think one of the reasons we got together to write the book was to, provide a text where students and trainers can really reflect on their own kind of blind spots and things that they might have swallowed whole or introjected and not integrated. So that's been it's just really been a very interesting path, I think. One of the things that I expected when we were writing the book, and gladly I was disappointed, was that I expected that there might be, as new theories were developed, I expected that there might be a kind of shift into, oh, this is the new way to do it now, or this is my new iPhone or my new whatever I've got now, sort of out with the old and in with the new. What I was really delighted to find was that as we moved through the development of the theory, there was in fact an honouring of the roots of TA. So it was, as you say, inspired people to think on and think differently and think more appropriately for our times. So as you see the books that are produced, like Helena and Charlotte's book and then Victoria's, the innovations in TA, just have this common thread all the way through, and taking into account the world that we're in today, and really the need for deep reflection and deep respect for differences of opinion. That's kind of where I go with it.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we can also engage with people at this point and ask them about their own aspirations or thinking, thoughts, questions, ideas.
Good timing.
I can see someone over there. I don't know, technique-wise, can I go and hand the microphone to? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, we can share this one, can't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it.
Hello. So my aspiration, this is still not having CTA, but when I think about TA theory, my aspiration is so our curriculum is rewritten, because we are learning so much from schools that are no longer so popular or applied so much anymore. And I'm specifically thinking about Golding's and Jackie Schiff and and so on. And I just get frustrated. Why do we still have to learn about this?
That's a good question. Oh, you don't need to apologise, but my microphone's falling apart, so I just need to find out how to put it back together again. Ah, there we go. More simple than I thought. Do you want to speak to that one, Deanna?
No. Yes, actually,
Okay,
I do. I would have something to say that I think it is important to look at these theories maybe not so much as methodologies to use today, but as ways to understand the times when they came into being, the dilemmas that they were trying to address. Maybe the struggles that practitioners were faced with at those times. And I think from that point of view, it is still valuable to know those aspects and to think of them in this way.
I was thinking with particular reference to redecision that you were talking about. Bill Cornell tells a lovely story about Mary Golding saying to him, why are people talking about transference? I hate transference. Like, we were trying to get away from that psychoanalytic stuff. And Bill said to Mary, redecision is a theory of transference. You just put the transference on the chair. Make it not so personal. So as Deanna was saying, if we think about the context in which these theories were developed, and then bring them alive in our current context, then I think there's a kind of richness to it in that way. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
I have an aspiration for us to restructure how we examine, and that we make it really accessible to everybody. That, like, I'm neurodivergent, and having just done my CTA, it is not neurodivergent friendly, and I would really like us to find a way whether we can do it by kind of a series of short video entries, for example, addressing the questions, that it doesn't have to be a written process that might be a real barrier to people.
Yeah, I believe that the IBOC, I forget what the committees are called now, but the Training Standards Committee or whatever they're called, they change every time. I think they're doing considerable work on that. And I think the neurodivergent network that's set up on Facebook, I think, has a lot of input. So I am hoping that the exam boards of AOTA and IBOC are moving towards, and it's slow progress. So I understand your frustration. Yeah. Do you want to take that one?
I was just thinking about, the very nature of innovation means that you're introducing something completely new. And often that can come with resistance. I just wondered what your thoughts were about adoption, which is obviously an aspiration when we have some brilliant new models and concepts.
Adoption.
Wider spread adoption, discussion, integration of new innovative ways of thinking about TA.
Within adopting, you mean people adopting children? Or no, sorry, just haven't quite understood the context of adoption. Yeah.
So maybe I wasn't clear. What I mean is widespread adoption or discussion or dialogue, integration of innovative new concepts and models within our own TA community. As at times it feels like we're introducing things, but that feels like a risk also, and it feels like there is a resistance to that within our own community. And I just wondered, my aspiration would be that, as a community we embrace new ideas, but I've also heard people say, oh, we're done with new models and concepts, stop that, go back to our roots. So I just wondered what your thoughts were about how we can be more open to new ideas in TA, which I think are much needed across the board.
Well, I think this goes back to what you were saying earlier about the difference between introjection and integration.
Yeah.
And how many times we can come with new ideas or new models and swallow them whole without actually reflecting and linking them with the backbones of our own theories and methodologies. So I think if we're not in this case of assimilating things without reflection, I can see the value of the new. Maybe you can share some more about this.
Yeah, I completely understand your question now. Sorry if I didn't at first. Because I think what I have seen over the many years development of TA, is that people develop into silos, basically. There's the kind of relational silo, or the redecision silo, or the cathexis silo. And I mean, I think the relational school is different because I think there has been more integration between. But I think when people are developing new ideas, there is at first a kind of natural rigidity or identification, like I'm now this and you're that and I'm different from this. And I think there probably is a necessary conflict. I don't know whether I'm agreeing with myself when I say that, but as people are establishing an identity, I think they do want to push out the old. And I think we could do far more as a community to have those discussions about different sensibilities, I think. Not so much different applications, but different sensibilities. Now, I do think it's happening between the four fields, and I think I know James Longwell is over there, but I think the TA podcast is doing a lot to bring more integration in between the four fields. And I think probably we could do more within each of our particular proclivities to have dialogue with each other, which is about difference. Difference and disagreement. Like, there are ways that I disagree with the way that some people do things, but I have to remain curious. Like, okay, why do some people like the mini script? I still don't understand it, and I've been around for 40 years. So just aspects of theory and different ways of applying the theory.
In some ways, I think I can also think about the therapy process being similar. As in therapy, we come with our old objects that we cling to and that we are attached to and that we are bound to be loyal to in some ways. And maybe sometimes this happens in relation to our theories. So whenever we encounter new ideas, new theories, they might be like new objects. And the question then is, how do we meet these new objects? How do they clash with the old loyalties? And what comes out of that clash? So to me, there are more questions than answers in regard to this topic that you raised, which I think is really rich. Thank you.
Oh, I just have one more thing. I was also thinking the reason I was attracted to TA, I was doing a clinical psychology master's at the time, and I was having to make a decision between whether to go down a cognitive behavioural route or a psychoanalytic route. And the reason I chose TA was that I found that I could really apply TA in both ways, and actually the importance was, what do my clients need? So when I first became inspired, I think, by a supervisor I'd got who was actually very quiet and said very little and allowed a lot of space for the client to bring their own experience. A couple of my clients would say to me, what are you doing sitting there so silently? You're like a fucking Buddha. I thought, okay, that's not that approach for that particular client. I need to really, I need to be flexible. And to do that, I have to examine my own resistances, actually, my intrapsychic resistance to the manuscript, for example. And then understand that so that I can be more flexible about what I offer to clients. Anything to add?
No. I'm just aware of time, I think.
Aware of time, yeah. So we're coming up to 10 o'clock. Could have one more question if anybody's got a burning one.
Question here.
Oh, there is one. James.
I'm not sure the microphone's going to reach me, so I'll just shout.
Shout.
What I was struck by was that TA was created in the USA, and then it's barely alive in the USA, and yet the USA dominates everything in our daily life. It's in the news cycle every waking moment. So I just wondered, what sort of, in your historical examination, what did you make of the significance of the US in our world?
It's a great question.
You should let me think about it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think about the US style and the context and the time. So I think, TA was out there kind of loud and proud, actually. And I think that led to a lot of the competitiveness of the people who developed it. I do think it's interesting that it's dying out in the US. And of course, it's just flourishing in Europe and India, actually, and China. China, Hong Kong, yeah. Anyway, it's kind of Asia. So I don't know what we made of it, apart from a kind of maybe a growth inwards to be more reflective rather than out there and loud and proud. You got anything to add, Tim?
We didn't approach this theme in the book, but what came to my mind were some of the ways in which I think TA found a prolific landscape in Romania. And I think it had to do a lot with this, revolutionary style of thinking and this idea of independence, perhaps a bit ahead of its time. And as a former communist country, Romania became independent of stepped out of the communist regime in 1989. And I think this a passion for independence that is many times heard very out loud in a lot of the American culture, I think this really appealed in that context. A lot of the things are themes around power and no longer being in a hierarchical system. So those are some thoughts that I can think about, but they're just raw at this point. Thank you for the question.
To reintroduce TA back to the US, particularly in Minneapolis, maybe.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay.
Both of you, another applause, please.